with many folks with bullhorns talking about hanging Mike Pence and using horrible epithets I can't mention here directed towards Nancy Pelosi. As I came back towards 4th Street, I came in sight of and was standing by 2 groups of people who were about 70 strong and were practicing marching in military formation. And they were chanting as they did, again, a word I can't use here, F those people, talking about the people in this building. And as Ms. Ocasio-Cortez said, people in this building were workers. They were Capitol Police who were in this building because they had to do an hour-and-a-half commute to do this job to protect this building that belongs to the people of this country so they could then pay the bills for their family and make that hour-and-a-half commute back. It was the cafeteria workers. It was everyday, hard-working, wonderful Americans. Now, at that point, I still didn't think anything about it because it never occurred to me that with all the anger and hostility I saw, with those groups of people that were marching in a formation, that when I was later sitting up in that gallery with many of my colleagues as the proceedings were taking place, it never, ever occurred to me that this building would be invaded. I took it for granted that that just couldn't happen. Of course it did. The first sign we had of something amiss is when we saw the security people for our leadership, the speaker, the majority leader, or the minority leader and our majority leader, rush them off the floor. We in the floor on the gallery still had no idea what was going on. Now, in retrospect, we find out the west side of the building was being breached. And one of the police officers said it was like a castle storming. Mr. McGovern took the chair. We began to continue the process of certification of the election until one of the Capitol Police officers told us that tear gas had been fired, that people had breached the building, get out the gas mask, lie on the floor. And then I saw Capitol Police officers with guns from their holsters. And I looked at these men and women, and I tried at that moment to imagine, what was it like for them that they actually had to have a weapon out? They had families. They had responsibility, and whatever fear they may have felt, their duty was to protect us. And they were going to do it, no matter what. And how small I felt at that moment, that because of someone who was doing their duty to protect me, I'm no more worthy than any other person who works in this building, but that's their job. They were threatened. And then, of course, we heard the shot when the mob was getting in to the door of the Speaker's lobby. And then to get us out, they had to bring us all the way across this chamber to the far door. And we got stopped right over here where these 2 doors were being breached. And we heard the sound and saw the poles that were being pushed through. And you know the rest, we're going to hear more stories. But I want to say that in listening to my colleagues and experiencing it myself where I had some fear, but then we were okay, the 2 things that just stay with me are that the tradition we've had in this country that's so commonplace that we do it every 4 years, a peaceful transfer of power, and how extraordinary it is that we do that every 4 years, was shattered. And the second thing is that we saw something that allowed Jim Crow to thrive for over 100 years after the Civil War, and that was the use of violence as a political tactic. And we now have a Capitol ringed by these 7-foot fences with concertina wire. So the trauma that we're feeling, working in the sense of isolation, is the trauma to our democracy. Our goal, our responsibility, is to restore that and not be defeated. I yield back.
Thank you. I now yield to my friend from New York, Mr. Adriano Espaillat.
Madam Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for organizing this special order hour this evening. As the events of January 6th are still burning in the memories of all of us, as well as millions and millions of Americans across the nation. Although some people would like to deny that it never happened or sweep it under the rug, it continues to burn in everybody. The images are so aggressive that they still burn in the memories of millions upon millions of Americans. I started that day as I start every day. I came to my office at 8:30 in the morning. I couldn't get through Independence Avenue because it was shut down, so I came through the back of my office building. And I noticed that I was walking on the sidewalk with some of the protesters, unimpeded. I felt as though security was very lax. No one stopped them. They were walking right next to me. They were around here as early as 8:30 in the morning. I went to my office, and as I proceeded at one point to leave my office to come down to the floor, I was informed that the Capitol had been breached. So we stayed in our office, and 2 police officers came to the office trying to escort us out and trying to take me to a site, a room in another office building where other members were to protect us. I decided to stay in my office with my team, and we locked ourselves in there. I could see from my window some of the protests. You see, this assault against the Capitol was not just concentrated on the Capitol steps. It was everywhere, really. And of course, at about 8 o'clock at night, a little bit before that, I came here to conclude the proceedings. I felt it was very important that we completed our work for the night and not be intimidated by that mob. Democracy could never be intimidated. And so I came here very early. I walked around as agents went around the Capitol and this floor securing evidence. And the scene was pretty horrifying, of furniture stuck up against the walls and blood stains right outside where someone was shot, was being mopped. And so this is a traumatic experience for all of us on both sides of the aisle and for our nation. It cannot be swept under the rug. We must get to the bottom of this. We must find out if there was members of this body who aided and abetted that angry mob, who instructed them of the whereabouts of Speaker Pelosi. You see, that mob came here saying they wanted to assassinate her, and they wanted to hang the vice president. So if anybody in this body assisted someone that clearly had an intent to attempt to murder someone, they're an accessory to that crime. And we must look at that evidence. Ultimately, we need to have the truth. And if we want unity in this body, we need the truth. If we want unity in America, we need the truth. That is what will unite us. We must have a deep dive, a deep investigation into what occurred. Did any of our colleagues text, email, or tweet the whereabouts of Speaker Pelosi? Did anybody tweet or share information about the labyrinth of tunnels and hallways in this Capitol building? They seem to know their way around. So the truth is important for the unity of our nation. This is a beautiful building and a temple of democracy. But Congress is not this building. It is each and every one of us, and by extension, the people that we represent. So an attack against us was an attack against our constituents. We are their voices here. And we must take a good look at what occurred. We must not sweep this under the rug. We must continue to ascertain and get all the facts and evidence to determine who played a pivotal role in perpetrating this crime. Only then we will have unity. Only then, through truth, we will have peace. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back my time.
Thank you. I now yield to my colleague from Texas, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee.
Let me thank the gentlelady from New York, first of all, for her courage and for convening us together. And I might say to the gentlelady that we're not doing this for ourselves. We have taken an oath of office. I have said this many times today as we debated a question of the status of a member. We took an oath to defend this nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And we realize that that oath is really above our own personal safety. That if we were called upon by this nation to defend her, to defend our constituents, I would venture to say that most members would stand by their constituents and this nation. This should not be taken as members fleeing out of fear, but it should be taken as an explanation and an expose of what happened in this place, how it was desecrated, undermined, diminished, how the American people watched this precious place. For those of us who've been here, I fled this place on 9/11. We were in a meeting, and all you could hear is a lot of noise. And members continuing to meet, not wanting to be disturbed, did not move until an officer or screaming came, and we heard the noise saying, "We don't know what's going on, but get out." In that instance, we fled, and all we could hear was, "Run as fast as you can and hit the ground way on the other side near First Street in the Supreme Court." I could see the billowing smoke and the plane that had hit the Pentagon. And so that fleeing, of course, was because we were told to do so. But members began to look for their staff and want to know what they could do. It was different from a having a pandemic. It was different from the setting here, except for the fact that members cared about what was going on in their constituency and their staff. Here we were in the same way. Members were protecting their staff in their offices. So I want this not to be about us, but the story needs to be told. And as you've already heard, there were those of us participating in this debate, some on the floor, some in the gallery. And I will tell you that the first thing I saw, Congresswoman, because we did not know of the huge crowds down near the White House. We didn't know that there were people dancing to music inside the White House, watching activities of attack here. But we didn't know about the major speech that was provoking a crowd of insurrectionists that had planned to come here and kill people. But the first thing I saw was good friends here rising up out of seats and moving out quickly. And only after they began to move did we hear the words, "Hurry up, get out, flee." Not necessarily flee, but first words I heard was our good leadership telling the doors to be closed. Thank them for that, our Sergeant of Arms who are here in this place. As we fled, we could hear the attack coming from the Senate side, and then we could hear the shooting that occurred right outside in the cloakroom area. And we crouched there, and some of my good colleagues and I began to pray. I started out by saying this is not about us, but it's about truth. And as I mourned and honored Officer Sicknick, as he was honored by being in a state of honor in this house, I was reminded of the many officers, Capitol Hill and Metro Police, that are in hospitals, that are still hurting, and that are still suffering. And I said earlier this evening that I offer to them my deepest concern and sympathy and respect, and I'll be introducing a resolution to honor them. But I think the importance of this reliving what we went through is, as I've heard from my colleagues, we must get to the bottom of this. We cannot let white supremacy, which is now the #1 terrorist activity or terrorist group in America, more so than foreign terrorists, dominate the goodness of what this democracy and this Constitution stands for. We can't let the idea of free speech be the source of the fueling of hatred and anger that turns to violence. We can't let individuals storm this building and call for the killing of the Vice President or the killing of the Speaker of the House or the putting on plastic cuffs on members of Congress. We can't frighten members of Congress in their offices. We cannot allow this kind of attack on voices like the gentlelady from New York who simply wants to tell truth. She has freedoms. So I'm here on the floor to say that we shall not be denied. We're never going to give up our love for democracy, nor its vitality. Nor are we going to let this country be dominated by the insurrectionists who came to this place to do nothing but act in a bloodthirsty manner. We're not afraid of you. And yes, on behalf of all of those officers that the video showed us that were beaten by American flags, beaten with signs of Nazism, we're going to get to the bottom of this for you. We're going to find out what happened. We're going to find out why the information came from the FBI to the city of Washington, D.C. and their police, and it was evidence that it was given to the brass here, but that there was no response in terms of the kind of equipment or the numbers of officers that were there, or why wasn't permission given to the mayor of the city of Washington to call up the National Guard? Why did this president deny access to the National Guard to protect not us, but this place of democracy? So I am grateful for this opportunity. We have work to do, but I think the greatest statement that we can make tonight, that we're in the light of day on this floor, as I said before, not for us, but to be able to stand in the shoes of all of those sheroes and heroes who fought in different ways, whether it was in the peace movement, whether it was in the civil rights movement, Black Power movement, whether it was Cesar Chavez fighting for farm workers, people who fought to make a difference for goodness. For all of those patriots, all of those fallen leaders, some assassinated like Dr. Martin Luther King, we cannot stand and allow the voices of those who provided horror to this place to suggest to the world that they have overcome us. I close by simply saying to the world that we had a day, January 6th, an attack on this place. Insurrectionists and domestic terrorists penetrated the United States Capitol, but they never penetrated the strength of the Constitution and our values and our commitment to protect democracy, but also to give respect and comfort to those who lost their lives on that day or thereafter in terms of our law enforcement officers, and sadness for those, unfortunately, that lost their life by being misguided, but also to be able to say that this is a place that we will hold sacred and we will be victorious, and white supremacy, insurrectionists, and also domestic terrorism will not prevail over us. We will win, and we'll win for the many Americans who believe in the goodness of this country. I thank the gentlelady for yielding to me, and thank her so very much for her courage again. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back to the gentlelady.
Of course. Thank you, Representative Jackson Lee. I now yield to my colleague, Mr. Representative Dean Phillips of Minnesota.
I want to thank you, my friend, the gentlelady from New York, for organizing tonight and for inspiring rising generations of Americans, including my own daughters, to dream bigger and to do better. I want to thank you. And I want to start my remarks by addressing those who have belittled, dismissed, minimized, or criticized anyone who has experienced trauma of any type, at any time, in any form. To you, I say I take pity on you, and I say shame on you. I was in this very room on January 6th when the insurrection began. I was one of 20 colleagues up in the gallery, just over my shoulder, who had to take cover behind our seats on the floor and struggled to activate our gas masks. The whizzing sounds, the collective whizzing sounds in this room, of which none of us will ever forget. We know the sound of the breaking glass, of the screams, and of the furniture being moved in front of the doors. We know the feeling of being trapped in this room and believing that being taken hostage may be the best case scenario. We know what it feels like searching for something, anything, with which to defend ourselves, and realizing a pencil is about all we had. And we know what it feels like thinking that it's a real possibility that we would not see our families and loved ones again. We won't forget. We won't forget. But I'm not here this evening to seek sympathy or just to tell my story, rather to make a public apology for recognizing that we were sitting ducks in this room as the chamber was about to be breached. I screamed to my colleagues to follow me across the aisle to the Republican side of the chamber so that we could blend in, For I felt that the insurrectionists who were trying to break down the doors right here would spare us if they simply mistook us for Republicans. But within moments, I recognized that blending in was not an option available to my colleagues of color. So I'm here tonight to say to my brothers and sisters in Congress and all around our country, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. For I had never understood, really understood, what privilege really means. It took a violent mob of insurrectionists and a lightning bolt moment in this very room. But now I know. Believe me, I really know. But I want to close with an invitation, a hopeful invitation at that, to everybody watching or listening. Whether you experienced January 6th right here in this room, whether you were barricaded in an office across the street, or whether, like most Americans, you experienced it through a television screen. Please do not allow that day to change you for the worse. Rather, please find something in it to improve yourself, to improve our country, and to improve our world. I surely did, and I hope you'll join me. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Phillips, for your extraordinarily powerful account. And I now yield to my friend from Pennsylvania, Representative Mary Gay Scanlon.
I want to thank the gentlewoman from New York for arranging this really important special order hour. You know, every day we are so grateful for the hard work and support of our congressional staff. Many of them are young enough to be my children, but they serve Congress and our country with brilliance and honor every single day. So this evening, I want to read a letter signed by nearly 400 congressional staffers to their senators, because they don't often have a voice on this floor, but their words are so raw and so heart-wrenching. Here's their letter entitled An Open Letter to Members of the U.S. Senate. We are staff who work for members of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, where it is our honor and privilege to serve our country and our fellow Americans. We write this letter to share our own views and experiences, not the views of our employers. But on January 6th, 2021, our workplace was attacked by a violent mob trying to stop the Electoral College vote count. That mob was incited by former President Donald J. Trump and his political allies, some of whom we pass every day in the hallways at work. Many of us attended school in the post-Columbine era and were trained to respond to active shooter situations in our classrooms. As the mob smashed through Capitol Police barricades, broke doors and windows, and charged into the Capitol with body armor and weapons, many of us hid behind chairs and under desks or barricaded ourselves in offices. Others watched on TV and frantically tried to reach our bosses and colleagues as they fled for their lives. On January 6th, the former president broke America's 230-year legacy of the peaceful transition of power when he incited a mob to disrupt the counting of Electoral College votes. 6 people died. A Capitol police officer, one of our co-workers who guards and greets us every day, was beaten to death. The attack on our workplace was inspired by lies told by the former president and others about the results of the election in a baseless, months-long effort to reject votes lawfully cast by the American people. Our Constitution only works when we believe in it and defend it. It's a shared commitment to equal justice, the rule of law, and the peaceful resolution of our differences. Any person who doesn't share these beliefs has no place representing the American people, now or in the future. The use of violence and lies to overturn an election is not worthy of debate. Either you stand with the Republic or against it. As congressional employees, we don't have a vote on whether to convict Donald J. Trump for his role in inciting the violent attack at the Capitol, but our senators do. And for our sake and the sake of our country, we ask that they vote to convict the former president and bar him from ever holding office again. And it's signed by nearly 400 congressional staff. Madam Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to enter their letter and their signatures into the congressional record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Scanlon. I now yield to my colleague from California, Representative Mark Takano.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, for leading this special order hour, and thank you for the bravery you've exhibited by sharing your story. Thank you so much. Well, January 6th was unlike any other day I lived through during my time in Congress. I awoke with Georgia on my mind, with hope in my heart, after the runoff victories delivered us a Senate Democratic majority. And that morning, it felt like we were turning the page on a dark chapter and entering a chapter of reckoning, progress, and ultimately unity. To finally turn that page, Congress needed to count the Electoral College votes and certify the historic election of President Biden and Vice President Harris. But that was supposed to be a perfunctory procedural action, but it became instead the target of an angry mob incited by the president, who encouraged that very mob to interfere and stop the counting of the ballots. And too many of my Republican colleagues empowered the lies that Trump told instead of standing up for the truth and for our democracy. I had followed press reports that early in that day. I followed press reports about a rally being organized by Trump supporters in Washington, and my staff warned me to be careful as I carried out business in and around the Capitol. I got to the Capitol early because I did not want to run into too many crowds, but I never imagined what was coming after Trump encouraged his supporters at a rally to storm the Capitol and disrupt the Electoral College count. About midday, shortly before 1 o'clock, I was returning back to my Cannon office building when the Capitol Police told me, "Sir, we are closing down Cannon. We are evacuating Cannon. You need to go either to Longworth House Office Building or Rayburn and take cover." So I followed the instructions. I made my way back to Longworth, where I took refuge in a colleague's office. And eventually, I made it to a secure location in the Veterans Affairs Committee offices in the Longworth basement. It was there my phone started to blow up with anxious constituents who asked me if I was okay, and they made me aware of what was going on outside. I turned on the television, and I could not believe what I was seeing. What I saw was Capitol Police being overwhelmed and the violent mob of Trump supporters breaking into the Capitol and bringing the Electoral College vote count to a halt. And as the violence unfolded, I have to say I was in a secure location, as safe as I could be for that moment. I was fine but shaken, concerned about what this meant for our democracy. I worried about the safety of my colleagues. I worried about the safety of the staff. I wondered when the National Guard would arrive, when reinforcements would arrive, because it was extraordinarily distressing to see our Capitol Police so greatly outnumbered by the crowd. I was safe, however, and I turned out to be fine, and I still am fine. But that is not the case for everyone. And unlike my colleagues and me who are here, most of the people who lived through the horrors of that day, they can't share their experiences on the floor of the House today. I'm here to give voice to and acknowledge the experience of hundreds of congressional staffers, Capitol support staff, maintenance workers, Capitol police officers who also lived through that deadly insurrection. They experienced and lived the trauma, and it is just as valid and real as the stories that are being shared here today. Staff barricaded themselves in office. They heard banging on the doors from insurrectionists who could harm them. Staff also evacuated the House chamber and gas masks, and they were alone, gathering any items they could use as weapons in case the insurrectionists broke into this very room they were sheltering in. They were in danger as well. This is their workplace. Hundreds of people who answer the phones and keep our buildings running and keep us safe every day. And when you run for office, you are confronted with the reality that you may be putting yourself in harm's way. Staff didn't ask for this. They didn't sign up for this particular job. They didn't sign up to be put up in harm's way, and they shouldn't have had to have dealt with an attack like this. They were just doing their jobs. And those who lived through that dangerous day or watched as the Capitol was attacked from home are also experiencing pain and trauma. And to them I say, what you're feeling is valid, and we're here to support you, and don't let anybody gaslight or diminish or belittle what happened on January 6th. It was a serious event. And over the past few weeks, I learned that following the insurrection, the Office of Employee Assistance has been overwhelmed with requests for counseling and support from our staff. And after my staff on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and I were made aware of this overwhelm at the Office of Employee Assistance, we worked with the VA to bring mobile vet centers to the Capitol complex to provide mental health services and resources to Capitol Police, the National Guard deployed at the Capitol, congressional staff, journalists, and anyone who needs it. I visited one of the vet centers this morning, and they told me, vaguely, Congressman, the numbers are there. The numbers, out of confidentiality, we won't tell you how many, but people are using these centers, and they're asking for help. The mobile vet centers can accept walk-in appointments every day, including weekends from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And if someone would like to schedule a next day appointment, they may call the Washington, D.C. Vet Center at 202-726-5212. And I just want to emphasize, you do not have to, if you work at the Capitol as part of the Capitol workforce, whether you work as a maintenance worker, whether you work as a staffer, this is available to you. I thank my colleagues and the staff who keep our democracy running. The only way to make this right and to help heal our nation is for the Senate to do the right thing and hold Donald Trump accountable for the insurrection he incited. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Congressman Cortez.
I now yield to Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan.
Thank you so much to my colleague for her incredible courage. I asked her to go last because I get because this is so personal. This is so hard because, as many of my colleagues know, my closest colleagues know, on my very first day of orientation, I got my first death threat. It was a serious one. They took me aside. The FBI had to go to the gentleman's home. I didn't even get sworn in yet, and someone wanted me dead for just existing. More came later, uglier, more violent. One celebrating and writing the New Zealand massacre and hoping that more would come. Another mentioning my dear son, Adam. Mentioning him by name. Each one paralyzed me each time. So what happened on January 6th, all I could do was thank Allah that I wasn't here. I felt overwhelming relief, and I feel bad for Alexandria, so many of my colleagues that were here. But as I saw it, I thought to myself, thank God I am not there. I saw the images that they didn't get to see until later. My team and I decided at that point we'd keep the death threats away. We'd try to report them, document them, to keep them away from me, because it just paralyzed me, and all I wanted to do was come here and serve the people that raised me, the people that told my mother, who only had 8th grade education, that she deserves human dignity, people that believed in me. And so it's hard. It's hard when my 7 brothers and 6 sisters beg me to get protection, many urging me to get a gun for the first time. And I have to tell you, the trauma from just being here, existing as a Muslimah, is so hard, but imagine my team, which I lovingly just adore. They are diverse. I have LGBTQ staff. I have a beautiful Muslimah that wears her hijab proudly in the halls. I have Black women that are so proud to be here to serve their country, and I worry every day for their lives because of this rhetoric. I never thought that they would feel unsafe here. And so I asked my colleagues to please try not to dehumanize what's happening. This is real. And you know, many of our residents, from the shootings in Charlottesville to the massacre at the synagogue, all of it is led by hate rhetoric like this. And so I urge my colleagues to please take what happened on January 6th seriously. It will lead to more death, and we can do better. We must do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tlaib. And I think that what the representative speaks to is so powerful and so important, because when we attack not just members of Congress for their and focus on them because of their gender, their faith, their race, their creed, we make everyone on this complex feel unsafe and feel less than safe, because our seats do not belong to us. They belong to the people of the United States. And we as members who come in and leave this chamber are not permanent fixtures. But there are so many others in this country who see themselves in the 435 members of this body. And to see individual members targeted, demeaned, singled out by virtue of how they were born is to single out and demean so many people in this country who see themselves on this floor. And with that, I'm so incredibly proud to yield to another powerful woman and leader that so many in our country see themselves in, Representative Cori Bush of Missouri.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and thank you for being such a leader at this time. Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise to reflect on how our office experienced the white supremacist attack on our nation's capital on January the 6th. Everybody's experiences are different, and everybody's experiences must be validated. Everybody's experiences. I remember sitting up in the gallery, listening to floor speeches, knowing that there was supposed to be a protest happening outside, seeing people outside, and thinking that this was just part of the day until something happened. And I just felt the need to stand up and walk out. I walked out and I walked over I went to the steps. I went down a flight and I went to the steps and I went to look to see what's happening outside. And I saw the tip top of flags. And then I saw more of the flags and I could read words. And then after I could read words, I could see people. And then I realized that people were approaching. So I hopped on the nearest elevator and left and made it back to my office safely. And when we came back into our office, we walked in and we started to see on our televisions people breaching doors. And I remember thinking, is this actually what's happening? The more I watched, and people were calling this a protest, let me say this, that was not a protest. I've been to hundreds of protests in my life. I've co-organized, led and organized protests, not only in Ferguson, Missouri, alongside the amazing Ferguson front line that most people don't even acknowledge. They don't even know their names. They don't even know who died. They don't even acknowledge the amazing people that put their lives and livelihoods on the line for our safety, believing that Black Lives Matter, because they actually do. And we shouldn't have to say it. It should just be true. But it's not evident in our society when we have to continue to say, my life matters. And then they hit us with things like this. And so I remember sitting in the office with my team and just thinking to myself, I feel like I'm back. At this very minute, I feel like I'm back. I feel like this was one of the days out there on the streets when the white supremacists would show up and start shooting at us. This is one of the days when the police would ambush us from behind trees and from behind buildings, and all of a sudden now we're on the ground being brutalized. It felt like one of those days. And I just remember taking a second thinking, if they touch these doors, if they hit these doors the way they hit that door, if they hit these doors and come anywhere near my staff, and I'm just going to be real honest about it, my thought process was, we banging to the end. I'm not letting them take out my people, and you're not taking me out. We've come too far. So, Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise with a message for our Republican colleagues. On January 6th, I thought about January 3rd, and I thought about how we all raised our right hands up and took an oath. Each and every one of us on this very floor, we swore that we would support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Even though that Constitution wasn't written for people who look like me, even that Constitution wasn't written by people who look like me, and even though that Constitution cemented an unjust nation for people like me, my team and I got to work, and we unveiled legislation to investigate and expel those who were responsible for inciting this attack so that we could defend it, because we have a duty to fight for a more perfect union, because we cannot stand up to white supremacy in this. Because if we cannot stand up to white supremacy in this moment as representatives, then why did you run for office in the first place? No matter what district you represent, no matter where you live, no matter Democrat or Republican, you represent a district that is on average about 700,000 people, meaning you have to resent those who love you, those who despise you, those who voted for you, those who swear they'll never cast a vote for you. People who talk like you and people who don't look like you. Building better communities, building better lives, building a better society. It's not a Democratic or Republican issue. We can't build a better society if members are too scared to stand up and act to reject the white supremacist attack that happened right before our eyes. How can we trust that you will address the suffering that white supremacy causes on a day-to-day basis in the shadows if you can't even address the white supremacy that happens right in front of you in your house? Does your silence speak to your agreement? Is the question. In St. Louis, the COVID-19 pandemic is disproportionately hospitalizing and killing Black and brown people. Well, I've lived that. We have people dying from gun violence, a crisis that stems from decades of economic disinvestment and disruption from an over-reliance on policing that this very chamber has continually voted to endorse. I've cried those tears. You don't know what that's like. So I ask you today, take a moment to think about what it's like to live what we live through. If you cannot do what's right in the face of blatant, heinous, vile, white supremacist attack like the one we just saw, how will you do right by the Black and brown people you represent who just want to know that our children will have safety, that our children will have life, and that they will have shelter, because you represent us too. So on January 3rd, we stood together to swear our oath to office to the Constitution. We swore to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, it was attacked by a domestic enemy called white supremacy, and we must stand together now, today, to uphold that oath and hold every single person who helped incite it accountable. Thank you, and I yield back.
So, Bush, and your comments today and how you carry yourself in this chamber every day are just a powerful demonstration of why so many people are inspired by your example. Thank you. Madam Speaker, how much time is remaining?
The gentlewoman has 4.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you so much. Lastly, I'd like to close speaking to the individuals, some of the individuals that have already been mentioned, and some of the folks that have already been mentioned in prior remarks. Our staff, our Capitol Police, our House clerks, we thank you. We know how many of you were put in the line of danger because of the job that you have. We know and felt how many staffers were willing to put themselves on the line in order to protect the members that they serve alongside. And that is a weight that no one should have to carry. And so we thank you. To our House clerks, we thank you. To every single staff member of the United States Congress, we thank you. To our food service workers, we thank you. To our custodial workers, sweeping up the glass on the floor shattered by white supremacists, cleaning up after their mess, there is not enough ways to say thank you. We thank you. To our Capitol Police, who are willing to defend us, we thank you. And again, to our staffers, we thank you. I would be remiss if I did not specifically thank my staffer right here to my left, Gerardo Bonilla Chavez, who was with me on the day of the attack and who did everything he could to protect me. I want his community to know that he is a hero. I want his parents and his family to know that he's a hero. Our staff already know that he's a hero. And I believe he's a hero too. And I know it's not just him, he'll be the first one to say that. But to every one of our House clerks, we thank you. To our Capitol Police, we thank you. To our food service workers, our custodial workers, every person here that was standing to fight for our democracy, we thank you. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield my time.
The gentlewoman yields. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the topic of my special order.
Without objection, so moved.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, in the first days of his administration,